Hey, I'm going to be talking about small teams doing big things. That was probably just what was being introduced, but I, of course, didn't understand a word of that. So I think there's a lot of focus right now on big business. There's this financial crisis. It's all these big businesses getting in trouble. Most of the businesses here today were huge businesses, Google, Yahoo, and so on and so forth. And I think in all of that excitement for big business, I think we tend to forget the, I think, most important story of the internet, which is that it enables small teams to do incredible things that wasn't possible before. Chris Anderson was talking earlier today about things going towards free. Bandwidth is close enough to being free. There's a lot of things that are close enough to being free. And on the internet, all of these things work together to lower the barriers of entry for small businesses, especially if you're, excuse me, a small business trying to build an e-commerce site, sell goods, sell services, sell anything really. Bandwidth is getting so cheap that we don't really almost count it anymore. Software, thanks to the open source community, is pretty much free now. We don't pay for that anymore. Computers are getting faster and faster, and you can run amazingly big sites off very, very little hardware. And all of these things really compounds to the fact that the capital expenses that used to be there in the past, in the 90s, to create a successful internet business are no longer there. They don't matter anymore. Capital doesn't really matter anymore for a lot of new small businesses. What matters is brain power. Brain power is the one thing that's not getting cheaper and cheaper, and it's not certainly getting faster and faster. So we have to try to come up with ways, hacks, to increase the potential of our brain power in small teams if we want to compete. Now, we've gotten rid of the obstacle of capital. The big guys no longer win just because they have more money. Now it's a battle of the brains. So I'll try to share some of the tips, tricks, and techniques that I've used at 37 Signals, the company I'm a partner at, and in the Ruby on Rails open source project. The biggest thing, I think, the biggest help for a small team, the biggest thing that's important to focus on is momentum. Momentum is this incredibly powerful source of energy for small teams. If you have momentum in whatever it is that you're doing, you're bound to be motivated. Stuff is happening, stuff is moving forward, you can see changes each and every day. That's very motivating. The number one component of productivity, in my mind, for creative fields such as programming or design or anything else where you're making something out of nothing is motivation. So if you have momentum, you have motivation. And if you have motivation, you have incredible productivity. Well, the problem with momentum in most projects is that it looks a little bit like this. This is a waveform of a sound. If you have a guitar and you strum it a single time, there's a lot of energy in the beginning. Just like in most projects, there's a lot of energy in the beginning of a new project. Everybody's excited about starting something new, trying something new. But as time goes on, this energy dissipates. It disappears. The project goes on and on and on, and nobody really is excited about it anymore. And this is exactly what happens when people set up projects that go for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 18 months, where they have this one long plan, one long master plan of how it's supposed to unfold. People are really excited in the beginning, but it doesn't last. And as soon as the energy dissipates, as soon as the energy leaves the project, so does the momentum, so does the motivation, and so does the productivity. So the trick is to keep introducing energy into the system. Instead of just strumming the guitar a single time, you want it to look something like this. You want it to look like music. You want it to look like something that is continually improving, continually exciting. And how do you do that? Well, you certainly don't do it by having 18-month projects. That's for sure. Humans are not built to have sustained attention for 18 months. So instead, try to cut it down. Have smaller projects. Start more things more often. At 37 Signals, we have, with less than 10 people, created 6 projects, or I should say products. We've built a multi-million-dollar business that's been doubling its revenues every single year since we started doing products. We've written a book called Getting Real with a lot of these ideas. We've released an open source framework called Ruby on Rails, and we've done all of this stuff with less than 10 people. Now, I'd like to believe it's because we're all supermen. It's because we're all super powerful, and that's how we're better than everybody else, but that's really not the case. The case is that we just choose to do less than everybody else. We choose to introduce more energy into our projects more often by keeping them a whole lot shorter. We have a favorite saying: whenever we get into this kind of feeling on a project we're working on, we ask first, what could we release in 2 weeks? If we had to cut everything out and release in 2 weeks, what could we do? The answer that comes back to us is often astounding in its usability, in how useful something you can create in 2 weeks can be if you set that to be your target. A correlated theme to this is the longer it takes to develop something, the less likely you'll launch it. This is most certainly true for us. Of all the projects we've done, the ones that have taken the longest are the ones that are most likely to get canceled. The stuff that gets live, the stuff that gets pushed out, the stuff that makes a difference are the small projects. The stuff that you can make in 2 weeks or 2 months, certainly not 18 months or 2 years. So, keeping motivation, keeping momentum, keeping productivity high is absolutely crucial if you are to be a small team and you want to make a big impact. In a big company, you can hide. Google has, I don't know, 50,000 employees. If one of those guys, if 10 of those guys, if 100 of those guys aren't really doing anything, aren't feeling motivated, they can just hide. I mean, who's going to find 100 people out of 50,000 that aren't doing anything? If you are 10 people, there's no place to hide. There's nobody who can just say, well, I'm just going to coast for the next 3 months. That just doesn't work, because then you don't get anything done. Now, speaking of getting things done, I think one of the key dangers of any team size, really, is the notion of interruptions. Interruptions are the enemy of productivity. You will not get anything done if you're constantly being interrupted. There's a lot of different types of interruptions, and a lot of these come from people sitting together. If you're in just one office, all sharing an office, sitting next to each other, it's very easy to tap somebody on the shoulder. Hey, check this out. I just found this cool link on the internet. Well, you might think that that was a cool link on the internet, but you just disrupted somebody who's actually doing something. And now none of you are getting anything done, and it's going to take a certain amount of time to get back into that flow. And that's especially true of designers and of programmers and of anybody who's trying to create anything creative. If you're constantly being interrupted, you're not going to get anything done. Required meetings is absolutely one of my pet peeves. I hate meetings. I think meetings are absolutely toxic. And I think the vast majority of all meetings are a waste of time. You get 10 people together in a room for 1 hour, and you've just wasted 10 hours of productivity. When we were building Basecamp, our first product, and by now our by far the biggest product that's pulling in all the money, I was working 10 hours per week on it. Most people, most companies will waste that in a single hour of a meeting, or half an hour of a meeting if they have 20 people attending. I think most meetings should just not be held. Most meetings are an email. Most meetings are a quick phone call. Most meetings are passing each other in the hall and saying, yeah, we should do that, and leaving it at that. When you treat meetings as something you schedule for an hour in a conference room, the meeting will take 1 hour. Whether the decisions that warranted that meeting were worth 5 minutes, it'll take an hour. You'll just chat about everything and nothing for an hour. Internet, which is that it enables small teams to do incredible things that wasn't possible before. Chris Anderson was talking earlier today about things going towards free. Bandwidth is close enough to being free. There's a lot of things that are close enough to being free. And on the internet, all of these things work together to lower the barriers of entry for small business. The businesses here today were huge businesses, Google, Yahoo, and so on and so forth. And I think in all of that excitement for big business, I think we tend to forget the, I think, most important story of the internet. Hey, I'm going to be talking about small teams doing big things. That was probably just what was being introduced, but I, of course, didn't understand a word of that. So I think there's a lot of focus right now on big business. There's this financial crisis. It's all these big businesses getting in trouble. Most